Good morning. My name is Michael. I'm going to be giving you a presentation over European feudalism for Group 3. This includes uh, D, Regime, and Christian. European feudalism began during the fall of the Roman Empire. There was a lot of tribes within Western Europe that were feuding, and they needed a governing system. This created the feudalism system. This was a protect and serve kind of system. It was a military system. So not so much the idea of what you think of the police forces today when people think of protect and serve. It's not just one body. It's those that are above the kings and lords protecting the peasants, and those that serve the peasants and the lords to the king, or the peasants to the lords. They would pay the homage to the king or pay the taxes to the king as well as the lords, and allowing those military leaders that are the lords and the knights to protect the peasants and the kingdom as in itself. As we stated before, the feudalism system began after the fall of Rome. It was not an economic system, it was a governing system. The manorial system is what drove the economics. This is what we speak about for a manor. The knights or the lords held the manor, and the peasants would work the land for the knights and the king, or the knights and the lords, to pay the homage to them as well as pay the taxes, so that they could pay the king for the rights of that land. The land was then worked and given to the lords, who were military leaders and proven themselves in battle for the kings. The fall of Rome within the feudal system created an absence of government within Western Europe. Anybody that does not have any governing body will fight for power. These peasants started to notice that there was no way of cultivating the land that they had. It was such rich land that could produce so much for those that lived within it, but it was being decimated by a tribal war. So they searched out for those both had power and the money to control the lands and control the peasants within them. This state of chaos began to come to an even keel once these nobles and kings took over the lands and created a governing system, as well as started to bring religion into the area. Due to the fall of Rome, religion started to build up within Western Europe. As we stated before, the lands were kind of a rent-to-own type situation. The kings owned all land. They would then give certain sections of land to the knights and nobles, kind of renting it out. So as we know today, that somebody rents an apartment from a landlord, they have to pay the rent to then have the land to live on, and in this case, work the land. This was a great privilege only for those that proved themselves in battle and were known as military leaders. The peasants, not so much, were not seen as a strong part of this system from the nobles and the kings. Later on, it proves a little differently, that the peasants had a lot more power than they thought. The peasants at this time didn't even believe that they had much power. They started to believe that their nobles were just that. They were noble. They could do no wrong. They did everything for the kings because the kings and the nobles were a state of Christ, the state of their lords. This was shown in some quotes that were found over time. One particularly that was to the Ingeborg of Denmark, the Queen of France. This quote stated, "The lords make the poor and make the rich." He brings the low, he brings exalts. These are the words of the Holy Spirit. This shows that the Holy Spirit both takes away and gives whatever is supposed to be given to that individual. That is the same thing that the lords did to these peasants in the time. So, in their state of mind, at this point in the world, they believed that those were an extension of God Himself. Feudalism affected Europe quite differently in many areas, although it was an engagement of individuals. And it was an arrangement of individuals. So it was kind of that handshake idea. The kings would give the land to the nobles. The nobles would then have an understanding with their peasants. There was no real written paperwork. As it began to go further into the systems, paperwork started to get written, but it was more along the lines of what the king said went. There was no shared power. This system discouraged trade and economic growth. So, for instance, the peasant would chop down a tree on a noble's land. If he tried to trade that tree for gold or, say, fur to a woodworker, he would pay homage to his lord. If he didn't do that, he would have essentially stolen from his lord. Perfect example. If you've ever seen Robin Hood, in that first opening scene, what are they doing? They're chasing a boy because he killed a deer in the king's forest. Just because there's a deer happened to be frolicking through the land and he killed it to feed his own family, he was stealing from the king. This did not allow trust, for one, and also economic growth and a sense of trade. The practices within feudalism varied a lot actually very little within Europe, but it began to vary a lot over time. Germany, for instance, it was a one-tier system. The kings would give the land to the knights or the nobles, and that land was only that knights and nobles until death. He could not pass it on to another noble within his area or pass it down to his kin. Within France, on the other hand, they were allowed to hereditarily pass down their lands to their kin. For instance, this built a little stronger system just because then it was passed down to an individual that had grown up on the land and had gotten a repertoire within with its peasants within its manor. This obviously would create a better kind of a handshake agreement, as we spoke about before, than just a random noble that came from another land, completely changed the system that would have been within that manor, just because the king decided to appoint him like it was set up in Germany. Now, a similar system had went into England because the Normans of France had invaded and defeated the Anglo-Saxons that had been ruling England since the fall of Rome. Beyond the ability to hereditarily pass down its lands to an individual, they could also then appoint another noble within their manor a section of their land. This allowed them to kind of create a better economical system, not the best because trade was still not easily attained within that system. One peasant could not trade with another peasant. It had to go through the lords to pass within. So it wasn't still a perfect system. The many variants aren't too dissimilar, but there was many changes within the systems. Now, the fall of feudalism was due to many factors, two of which were middle class or peasant based. The peasant revolt began and really pushed the idea that the peasants held all the power. The peasants no longer wanted to work the land. They no longer had to work the land. They just left the land. There was no one else to work the land for the nobles. Mix that with the fact of the Black Death and many other diseases that had crossed through Europe. The middle class began to gain power. They had the money, the nobles died off. They then were able to create a more economical system that benefited the masses. Throughout our research, we utilized multiple different citations, one of which was Britannica. We've seen this be utilized in many of our other parts of our course throughout the semester. This was the presentation of European Feudalism for Group 3. Thank you very much.